Welcome to Something to Talk About with the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We're sponsored by Fieldstone Memory Care, Bainbridge Island. Innovative and compassionate care worth the wait. Call 360-271-2530 to schedule a tour of Fieldstone's beautifully appointed apartments on Rolling Bay today. So anyhow, it is my pleasure to introduce you again, our monthly visitor, our wizard of politics, David Harrison. Hi, David.
Hello. So many of us have been together before, and as you know, our style is to stop several points in my presentation so you could throw out questions, insights, or insults with regard to what I've said. I think my own feeling is that there's a lull for a lot of activists. There's a lull in action, and that we should be certain to unlull ourselves pretty soon, because the whole reason we were able to take back the House in 2018 and the presidency and the Senate last year were because of an uncommon period of activism by resistors to the malevolent rule of Donald Trump and his minions. So I want to remind you that I said this before, that Joe Biden is nothing but not intentional, and his whole idea about winning in 2022 and Democrats, no, not necessarily him, winning in 2024 is based upon how we get our health and our economy out of COVID. He wants to, it's bizarrely, because Trump had something to do with inventing the vaccine, and then, of course, creating the climate in which people resist it. Biden is the COVID president now, and if we can get in a situation where the economy, where we're not living daily horrors by next March, then that will be very much to our benefit. But how that sets up legislatively was the American Rescue Plan that passed earlier this year, American Jobs Plan, which is the infrastructure bill that is about to pass, and then a third bill, a second Reconciliation Act, that will be huge, although not the 3.5 trillion they're talking about, which will pass this fall, improve Medicare, and advance pre-K and community college education across America, something close to full funding, tuition-free community college attendance. So those are all pillars for Biden. That plus, of course, all his executive orders, rescinding Trump's executive orders, meaningful action on climate, and naming adults to positions of government where they're actually believe in the agencies that they're running. I think it's fine to feel relieved that we're back to adults running the show, but I think it's important that we realize that we have some vulnerability for next time around. And that's why I'm apostate and do not think in any way that we should remove the filibuster. It was too advantageous to us in the years 2016 to 2020. And to me, removing it while we have 50 votes and are in danger of having 48 would be a big old self-inflicted injury. So I'm not for it, and I'm not for it even if it means that we can't pass the John Lewis Civil Rights Act. I want to talk about, before I do my first pause, I want to talk about 6 things where we could stub our toe in the next month or so. And then we'll do a pause and talk about my 6 things or any other questions you have. And then after that, I want to talk about 4 conditions that are very positive for us that should keep us strong if we recognize them and take advantage of them. So first, the 6 troubling things. First, with regard to Afghanistan, which right now Biden's in an unpopular position, as are the Democrats. Joe Biden always said he would go out of Afghanistan, and he argued that position when Barack Obama maintained our force there. The issue, of course, in terms of the public is the how. The reason why Joe Biden didn't start channeling Americans out of Afghanistan and our Afghan friends is that the Afghan government would have dissolved right then. He needed to maintain the possibility that the Afghan fighting force would actually defend their country. Of course, that didn't happen. They dissolved immediately. And that was basically them making a bet. If you think you can hold on for 4 months, but you're not going to hold on forever, then you should dissolve as soon as you can. Unfortunately, the Afghans had asked Biden not to make a big show of withdrawing. And I think Biden's people were ill prepared for an immediate airport crisis. So you get people running down the runway trying to catch a moving jet is not a good thing. I think once Biden made that promise to the Afghan prime minister, they should have been on red alert on how they could get 5,000 troops to the airport immediately. The good news, if there is good news, is there is a reason why the Taliban are going to not turn into the same terrorist state that housed Osama bin Laden. And that is that there's $7 billion of currency of $77 billion of Afghan resources that the West has frozen. The Taliban want to be a part of the international community because their economy is an awful mess. And as you know, even if you're a supporter of the Taliban, you're for having food to eat and shelter. So that's one of the reasons why all these background agreements exist between the Taliban and the United States, including some secret agreements on how groups of Americans got out. You could look at 120,000 people getting out as a marvelous thing. Our other defense, of course, is that Republicans are forgetting that Trump wanted us to get out in the worst way. So I think that we don't have a danger in the long term of Afghanistan defeating us in a year, unless, however, the Taliban make it a terrorist state. Secondly, of course, as I said, Biden owning COVID was kind of weird at the beginning because Trump did have something to do with the vaccine that has changed the lives of a lot of us. It's not like we're not worried about the COVID, but I don't know about you, but I'm a lot less worried about it after my 2 Fauci ouchies. So I think that we have to the danger is that him owning COVID next spring won't be as good of a thing. We have got to turn the corner. Obviously, 18 of the highest caseloads right now 17 of the 18 are in states that voted for Trump, and the 18th is Georgia. So right now, after a start in blue states, it's sweeping through red states, and the fact that DeSantis and Abbott are poster children for denialism is a good thing for us politically. But you want Biden to be able to run on getting America out of its misery and the economy coming out of its misery. And right now, that's yet to be proven that we will get to that spot. Fourthly, so that's 2 and 3. Fourth, Biden could slip in terms of his capacity to lead. Most of us on this call are over 65, and we know that on some days we're not quite as ready to race through the day as other days. And it's really too bad that Joe Biden didn't get his chance to be president like back when George W. Bush was president, because it would have been much easier for him. I think he's doing a good job. And also, number 5, I'm worried about Kamala continuing to be behind the mask. We need her to be a strong vice president. I don't think they have solved the question of how to make her more visible and more of a positive force. They make a show of bringing her in when we need the 51st vote in the Senate. They gave her some major duties with regard to immigration, but too much of Kamala's vision seen is standing behind Joe Biden, nodding her head when Joe Biden is making a pronouncement. They need to fix that. Whether or not Kamala's our candidate in 2024 or not, they can't have that be the primary image of the vice president. The 6th danger for us is immigration. At any time, we haven't done anything to fix the border crisis, and that the good news for us politically on that, Americans are divided on what the it should be. So, but it would be nice, even though they're not going to get a deal out of Congress, if we could see uncommon excellence in terms of our immigration management, would be nothing but a good thing. So those are 6 things to worry about. Of all of them, since we have made such a big show of having a CDC and White House team on COVID, we need to make that work. And when Biden said 70% by the 4th of July, he was betting on that being close to herd immunity, and he was betting on the American people not being as idiotic as they are. How you could face a microbe that could kill you, will kill you, and will kill somebody else that you know, and opt for horse worming medicine instead, shows the level of distrust the American people have in government, I guess, or just the insaneness. But that slowed Biden down a little bit. Now with the new mandates, U.S. Armed Forces, a lot of employers, the U.S. government itself, that will push us from 70 toward 80. And hopefully that plus all these cases we're running through in the South will hopefully get us to a point where we can unmask again and start seeing the tail end of all this. So I'm going to stop for a minute, and then I'm going to talk to you about 4 things that bode very well for Democrats and will, I think, allow us to prevail at least in the fall of next year. Are there questions and thoughts about any of these matters?
You can open up your microphone if you'd like to ask a question or a comment. One thing that I noticed the last 2 weeks is that there has been a lot of right-wing commentators that have died from COVID, and they were advocates for people not getting the vaccine and mask. And I'm hoping that that will change some people's minds.
Yeah, I think there's nothing like getting the COVID and either almost dying or dying to cause an epiphany. There's Danny Westnet had an excellent column 2 days ago in the Seattle Times about a leading vaccine resistor from, I think he lived in Snohomish County, dying, and somebody commenting that they might be close to out of empathy for such people. Obviously, we have empathy for anybody dying. But this is an amazing thing in America that I know we had denialism for the Spanish flu in 1918. It's 2021 that we could have this is odd. There is, I don't have it right before me, but I could email it to anybody. There is now, are people promoting how when you see inaccurate social media posts on vaccines, how you can report inaccurate information in social media. Anybody wants that, I'll put my email up in chat and I'll send you a link. That's one thing we can all do when we're out and about on the internet. If we see bizarre falsehoods, we should act, because a lot of it feeds on itself. But as I think, as Karen says, vaccines are on the uptick now, and as I said, the mandates, employer mandates, will make a lot of difference, as will concert venues, sports events, and so forth. As those move along, we should amble toward 80% of vaccination. And then by fall, we should have an approved vaccine for children 5 to 12-year-olds. So there's a lot of hope.
Yeah. I just heard of a 2-year-old that's in clinical studies right now for having, I mean, I was just trying to imagine what it would be like to have a 2-year-old and say, yeah, sure, go ahead and take this, you know, be one of the first 2-year-olds to do this. And a lot of these children are family members of medical professionals who were also in the clinical trials. I mean, talk about our heroes. I mean, I just can't say enough. Yeah. Yeah, it's very impressive. So, yeah, Bonnie or Lawrence, do you have something to say?
Well, David, I was just wondering, when the army that we trained, and it was supposedly 300,000 strong, it was so shocking to have that just see them just putting their arms down. Or just you're thinking about that. I don't know.
There's an excellent essay in the most recent New Yorker on this. And what they're saying is, when we took over after 9/11, we were surprised at how fast the Taliban melted away and how easy it was to take over. And that this is the reverse phenomenon. It's not based upon your short-term fighting ability. It's based upon your calculation of whether you're going to prevail in the long term. What the New Yorker said in addition to that is so that you have a superior fighting force, but it's an endless draining desire to prevail and stay alive. And in the midst of that, there was never, it's what, I mean, I'm not exactly quite agreeing with Biden that you can't boost nation building in another country. I had in 2008, 30 Afghan leaders that were middle government level and had such great dreams for Afghan democracy, and we're trying to make it work, including one who lives in Portland now after surviving an assassination attempt. The upper echelon leaders, so much like we were fighting in Vietnam, were unimpressive patterns of their own resources, and they never really had the national leadership. But what the New Yorker article says, some expert on Afghanistan has, it doesn't have anything to do with short-term military advantage. If you're going to melt away, you melt away at the most propitious time to melt away. And so I think that's what happened. I think they didn't feel that they were going to sustain themselves in the long term. Other questions, thoughts before I go on to these 4 other matters?
Anybody else?
So there's some news about how we're doing, and I want to talk to you about the census for a minute. So as you know, the census results have come out, and I think the news reporting on that is unfortunately misleading. The additional congressional seats are Florida, Texas, Colorado, Montana, North Carolina, and Oregon. So there's some chat about how, since Nancy Pelosi only has a 7-seat advantage, how there being new states, one in each of those states and 2 in Texas, could disadvantage us. There is only so much you can do with gerrymandering. First, in Colorado and Oregon, and you wouldn't have it in the first place because the Democrats are in control. I was talking about destructive Republican gerrymandering. So now with those 2 states out of the picture, we're talking about whether we could be disadvantaged by Florida, Texas, North Carolina, which we sometimes win, and Montana having an additional seat going from 1 to 2. The thing to remember there is the people that are being put into districts are overwhelmingly non-white. It is certainly the case that Democrats should not take African American, Asian Americans, and Latinos for granted. But it is also very much the case that we just won an election because of Asian Americans, Latin Americans, Latinos, and African Americans. We won Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, New Mexico, and Georgia, among other things, because of these populations. So it's a good thing to remember that the census just showed a dramatic increase in these ethnicities relative to white populations. The percentage of Americans since in the last 20 years that are whites is down 8.6%, and the percentage of other ethnicities is up. African Americans up 5.6, Latinos up 23%, Asian Americans up 35%. All these ethnic groups in general are heavily weighted toward Democrats. That isn't to say that there aren't Asian Americans that are Republican voters. And in fact, in Florida, we lost Florida in part because we lost Cuban Americans who did not like Obama's policy toward Cuba. So none of these things are to be taken for granted, but the bastion of the Republican Party is white males, embarrassingly, for those of us who are on this call who are white males. And there are a smaller percentage of the electorate than at any time since George Washington was hanging out. So that's turns out, as some of you know, after Republicans lost in 2012, they said we can no longer win this way by getting 50.1% by emphasizing white voters, and that was their autopsy of how they lost in 2012, because as you know, they barely won 2 elections before then through that strategy. They said, we can't do this anymore. And then Trump proved in 2016 that they could do it one more time. But the difference between the 81 million votes we got and the 74 million he got last time is entirely based upon our ability to register and get voting people of other ethnicities. And of course, as you know, our improvement among suburban women who we lost in 2016 and won in 2020. The other bit of good news then here is, so the census helps us, the demographics of America help us. We're becoming a true multi-ethnic society, and that lesson is huge for us as we function as activists, to function in a way that appeals to all Americans. I think the good news is for Republicans like DeSantis or, my worry, Nikki Haley, to win back the suburban women that Trump lost. They're good. They would have to move away from the Trump message. That is, if you, turns out suburban women are against insurrection, for instance, and for the most part are against the big lie. So they've kind of boxed themselves in, and the census is not a long-term negative for us, it's a positive. I wanted to mention 3 other positives and then I'll stop. Republican infighting continues. The new news from Washington State is splendid, although too bad for Jamie Herrera Butler, who's the Republican congresswoman from Clark County. We had hoped to beat her this last time with Carolyn Long, who was an excellent candidate that some of you met. Jamie Herrera Butler is being opposed in the primary by a Trumpite who he just endorsed. We could win that seat because of that. The way that works is her support goes away in the primary, and then she loses the primary, and then the candidate is such a right winger in the general election that we are able to win more of the center, which Jamie Herrera Butler won this last time, in which Carolyn Long or someone could win back. So you want Trump and Mitch McConnell to endorse separate people. That's what's happening in Ohio. You want that to continue to happen around the country because you want some of those wingers that love Trump to win, and so that we can beat them in a general election. So that's going strong. That's not going to abate. Mitch and Trump are permanently estranged. They're not going to have, Mitch is not going to hustle on down to Mar-a-Lago like Kevin McCarthy did. He thinks the way to win the Senate, Mitch thinks that Trump lost Georgia, giving us the 50 votes in the first place. So he thinks that the way to win back the Senate is to elect people who don't believe in the big lie and who are running as basically left of center conservatives, right of center conservatives, but not wackos. The third piece of news, of course, is the insurrection news. The task force has subpoena power, and they're subpoenaing phone records, and eventually they're going to be able to prove that Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz and others pleaded with Trump to send the National Guard. They were as scared as other people were. They were in safe rooms in the Capitol complex. And eventually, because they have subpoena power, Pelosi's commission is going to be able to portray an awful story of Trump chortling while Congress was in danger. And I think that will be a live story well into next year. Finally, and disappointingly, it's next spring that the Supreme Court will rule on Roe v. Wade's, the case coming out of Mississippi, which is not like what was just the case that's live in Texas. And the case in Mississippi, they accepted intentionally because they hope they have 5 votes to overturn Roe v. Wade. That doesn't mean it would be a full overturning. It might be like a strict 90-day strict no beyond the first trimester ban or something like that. Remember 2 things. 70% of Americans don't want Roe v. Wade overturned. And if it were overturned, remember, that doesn't overturn it in the states. It basically creates a right for a state to prohibit it. So we would still have choice rights in 30 or so states. So I'm going to stop there with those positives, the political positives, Republican infighting, insurrection news, the census, and Roe v. Wade. And let's go on to, in our remaining time, to questions, thoughts, and concerns.
Yeah, Madeline and Dawn, you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute yourself? Oh, that was just a slip of the hand there. Okay.
or a shaking of a fist.
The shaking of the fist. Anybody else have a comment or a question? Yeah, that I know that my world was rocked by the Supreme Court. I mean, I certainly kind of expected what that.
Well, remember, that's not a decision on the merits. That's the most recent Supreme Court stay has to do was a procedural refusal not to issue a stay. It
Exactly.
was based upon the law creating a civil course of action for a citizen to sue somebody who's getting an abortion, and it made it harder for Roberts to get 5 votes for the stay. It's interesting because Roberts clearly wants to turn himself into a centrist, which he would be able to do. I'm sorry, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a phenomenal person, but she knew she was sick. And if she had let Obama name a new justice, Roberts would be a 5th vote for things like this rather than a 4th.
Yeah. And then of what that happened to Merrick Garland, it was just, I think it's a constitutional crime what happened there, but
Yeah, that's right.
oh, just unbelievable that was allowed to happen.
How we ended up when we have the majority of voters in this country, how we ended up 6-3 against us. It's weird.
I know.
Keep in mind, if you're looking for a glimmer there, Gorsuch and to some extent Kavanaugh are anti-interventionists. To the extent we can maintain the majority in the Senate and the House, that decreases their adventurism because they have so much of their doctrine that is based upon the courts not intervening in every circumstance. That's the only glimmer I can give you.
Thanks for that, helps a little.
Yeah. I'm all about minimal glimmerism.
So anybody else? So wow, everybody's quiet today. Woo.
It's hey Tom.
Maria. Oh, okay. Who was first, Tom or Maria?
Well, I was just going to finish up on the Supreme Court. I guess there's no chance of anything happening because of Clarence Thomas and his wife and the financial things.
I don't think so. I mean, I'm not an expert on Supreme Court ethics, but I guess if there were allegations on that matter, it would be up to the Senate and not up to the court itself. Isn't that right?
Right. I think it's the Senate that has to do impeachment, actually impeachment. Criminal. Yes. Mhm.
If I can,
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I'm on just audio, but this is Laura. The Supreme Court, they do their own ethics policing. So short of impeachment, it's totally up to the court.
And what would they do if they were to police Clarence Thomas? Say if Roberts had the votes to do that, they can't unseat him. So what would be the nature of the policing?
Basically, it'll be like, no, but, they would try to get him to recuse himself. They would try to get him to do things like that, but that's pretty much the limit of what they would do. But, I'm thinking of, Dick Cheney and Scalia and, they seem to allow and, anything to happen. But
yeah, I think the Amy Coney Barrett and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh would all be reluctant to punch out Clarence Thomas. I think in odd cases, each of those judges, or certainly Gorsuch, has his peculiar position on law. For instance, he wrote the opinion that interpreted so the Civil Rights Act to apply to LGBTQ. So sometimes we get weird things happening with that court, and that, of course, is the way that Elena Kagan is trying to play it. it just makes it much harder at 6-3. It was a great strategy when we were 5-4 to make friends among justices. It's harder at 6-3.
Yeah. Tom.
I'd like to thank David again for doing this. It's really informative and very, very good of you to come back every month. I still have a big concern with voter suppression. And I also worry about the, Afghan withdrawal, the way that's being played. I'm wondering if, Democrats will be able to overcome that in the next election.
Well, let's take those one by one in reverse. So, I mean, the worry would be if you went back in history and looked at Hillary's positive rates a year before Benghazi, it's clear that they Benghazi'd Hillary, that near her end of her term as Secretary of State, she had totally rehabilitated the image that she had before then, and that 70% of the American people thought she did a terrific job as Secretary of State, which she did. So you're worried that one would be worried they could try and Benghazi Biden, and they will, and they have. One defense, of course, is that Trump had the same position. In fact, there's an argument that he weakened the way that Biden could do the withdrawal by negotiating only with the Taliban. Secondly, the defense is that Biden has military things he can do going forward. So his ratings for how he did this are low, but I think he knows that, and among other things, him fighting against ISIS in Taliban, which ISIS in Afghanistan, ISIS are fighting the Taliban, could help mitigate the negatives. I think thirdly, Americans in general wanted to go out of Afghanistan, so it's possible that this will diminish as a political liability. The other liability that Tom raised that counters my four strengths is voter suppression. I think the extent to which suppression has happened so far is disheartening, and never make a mistake, even if it's a little bit of suppression. Its entire intent is to decrease the participation of minority voters. Do not ever buy into there being any motivation beyond that. Having said that, I think the losses in Georgia are minimal because 95% of the state is registered and because Stacey Abrams is a goddess. But I do think the suppression bills that were passed in Arizona and Texas make it a little harder for us to win races in Arizona and Texas. That doesn't mean that we couldn't win. It just means that they have succeeded in doing what they wanted to do. None of these things, there was this mistake a few months back when the Georgia bill was referred to as Jim Crow on steroids, rather than what Stacey Abrams said, which was Jim Crow in a coat and tie. There's many, many millions more African Americans voting than there were during the Jim Crow laws, which had poll taxes and outright rejection of Black registrants. So this is much more subtle. This is Sunday afternoon voting, or nobody can pick up your ballot for you. Little things that cut against how ethnic majorities have tended to vote. So in firewall states, the traditional firewall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, we're not seeing meaningful change. So Tom's right that this is disheartening. He's right that we're not even able to pass the John Lewis Act, let alone the overall Voting Reform Act. But it's not making anything inevitable for next year.
Thank you, David. Any other questions? Comments? All right. So you have any pearls of wisdom, more pearls of wisdom for us, David?
About pearled out. I did give you my email. If any of you want, well, if you're on social media anyway, this email that I will send you will show you how to report misinformation to social media sources. So don't hesitate to email me and ask me for that. Now that you have my email, if you want to come on my blog, which several of you are on, that's our unfinished work, and you can do that. Karen and I will continue to do this and read as long as there's people who want to do it. I would say that as a closer, that if you're a check writer, that how you write checks is a big issue. I'd like to write checks to people who need checks. So I would no longer send money to Fair Fight, Georgia, which is Stacey Abrams' deal, because they have more money than they know what to do with. I would start looking for people who judge congressional and Senate races as being close. We were able to not get outspent, and some of us spent some money on trying to beat Mitch McConnell that we sent checks that we never should have sent. She did not have a chance. We need to be more careful and send money to our top 5 senatorial races, which will be Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, North Carolina, and Iowa,
Okay.
and not get ahead of ourselves. Sheila.
Yeah, I've been getting a lot of requests for Gavin Newsom to send money to him. What do you think about that?
It's a new poll yesterday that if it is to be believed, I'd go back and look at that. If it's to be believed, we're out of the woods. And that 53% to 39% Californians aren't going to recall Newsom. If that poll, I'd have to take another look at it, but you can yourself. If it's anything close to a large sample size by a reputable poster, I'd stay the hell away and not waste my money because he'll survive.
Good, thank you. That's good. I one other person that I wanted to ask about, and we're talking Texas before you were. Where does Beto O'Rourke fit into all of this?
Well, I think somebody can correct me, but I think he's thinking about running against Greg Abbott, or at least running for governor. That would be interesting, especially with the changing demographics that we talked about. As you know, he got 48% against Ted Cruz. Unfortunately, later on, he said, hell yes, I'd take your guns. That didn't turn out to be such a wonderful thing to say, if you're from Texas, at least, or anywhere. So, yeah, I think he's on the scene, and I think he's looking to run for something, and that the most likely thing is against Abbott, who would not be up this coming time, but the time after that. I think that's right. Other question, Tom?
I think that the Democrats have a chance in Ohio for the Senate. Sherrod Brown, is very popular, and they have a strong candidate. Portman is not running. So I think, I do think there's a good shot in Ohio.
Yeah, I think the lead primary candidate is Tim Ryan, who's a longtime congressman, and is that's definitely a blue collar play. That's what Tim Ryan is a fighter for the worker. But as Tom knows, that's where our biggest atrophy was in Ohio, was losing the working man. Pennsylvania is a great shot. The governor won last time by 800,000 votes. That's Toomey, Pat Toomey, who's leaving. I talk a lot about John Fetterman, who's the very principled, imposing Secretary of State. He's 6'7", former small town mayor who had no use for the big lie. But he's not the only candidate. It'll be interesting. But we have a great pickup chance in Pennsylvania. We have a decent one in North Carolina. Ron Johnson's not going to run in again in Wisconsin, so that would be good. And Charles Grassley's going to retire at 90 in Ohio, so that'll be a good shot too. But the favorites of all are Ohio and Pennsylvania. There's some hope that we'll have a shot in Missouri if the Republicans nominate the disgraced former governor.
Yeah.
So you're saying we should send money to, this is my home state of Wisconsin.
Yeah, I haven't looked at who the candidates are going to be, but since we have the governorship barely, I think it's fair to say that it's in play, and if we run a good candidate, then Trump will come in and endorse somebody who believes in a big lie, and it'll give us a better shot at the Senate.
Yeah, when
Ron Johnson was caught off mic the other day saying we won the election, so the truth comes out now and again.
when I was out there recently, I was talking to my son who's got his ear to the ground pretty much, and he was saying that it will be very hard to take the Senate away from the Republicans, that no matter who, because there are pockets, small pockets of Democrats in the state, but the whole of the rural area is totally Republican.
You're saying take the U.S. Senate seat, or are you talking about the Wisconsin State Senate?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Are you talking about the U.S. Senate seat?
The one that Rob Johnson.
Yeah. I think that would be true in the governor's race, and we won that. So I don't see why we couldn't.
People like Evers out there. They apparently like Evers a lot.
Yeah. So it's a matter of who runs. I would definitely put it behind Ohio and Pennsylvania. So we will see you again on October 1st.
October 1st.
We will, by then we better be talking about how we're all going to get up off the couch. My favorite beyond candidates is local organizing groups that have intensity of effort, especially since there's so little travel to campaign. And for 2 years now, I have been pushing and donating to a Latino registration and voting organization called Mi Familia Vota.
Oh.
And I would definitely Google that. There's a couple others, but I've had them on my Zooms and they are really sharp. And I'm here to tell you that not only were they key in Arizona, but surprisingly key in Georgia, where there's quite a significant number of Latino voters.
Yeah, I just looked that up. Okay, thank you for that, David.
So it was good to see you all, and I'll see you next month.